I know you're excited to get into your Python code, but before you start writing your script, take a second and do this first. So what we're going to do is we're going to set up what's called a virtual environment, and that's just a way to kind of box everything together so that we can make sure that nothing affects the rest of your system, and also so that we can keep things clean, maybe from one project to the next. That's maybe not as big of a deal if you're not planning on being a developer, but it's still a really good practice, and this will help out a lot with some other things, and we'll show you that in just a second. So if we pop over to our terminal, I am in Visual Studio Code, and I just opened up the terminal, and I have moved into this folder called Python Tutorials. I figured this is where I'm going to put all of my projects for now. And so you can make a folder somewhere and go ahead and navigate to that in your terminal. If you need help with navigation for the terminal, click the card and you can see the video for that. So the first thing we need to check is that we've actually got Python on our system. So let's type in Python, see what happens. All right, so you can see that this has Python 2.7. Now we don't want to use anything with Python 2. We're going to be using the latest and greatest, or at least mostly latest. So we're going to exit this. Just type exit with 2 parentheses. Hit enter, and I'm going to clear this out. In order to use Python 3, and I haven't done anything special, I've just installed Python on this system, I'm going to actually have to type Python 3 and then either the file name of the script that I want to run, or I can enter into what's called this Python shell so that it does Python right here. So I can type something in Python, and this is what would happen when Python runs this line. However, that's kind of annoying to have to type in the 3, because when I'm going and I'm just typing along, I don't want to remember that I have to put 3 in front of it. Same with if I'm installing something with pip, I'd have to put pip 3, and I don't want to have to deal with that. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to start a virtual environment so that it remembers when I'm inside this project and when I've activated the virtual environment, it's going to remember that I want to use Python 3, and then I don't have to type out any of the numbers or anything like that. So the way we're going to set this up is we are going to type in this command, Python 3, because that's the version of Python that we want to use. We're going to push -m as in Mike, venv, which stands for virtual environment. And then what we're going to do is we're going to name our virtual environment. So I'm actually just going to repeat the same venv because it's easy for me to remember, but you can choose whatever you want to for this name here. And that might be useful if you need to have several virtual environments that you need to choose throughout your projects. So I'm going to hit enter, and we're just going to let it run. And once it's done, and if we type in ls to find out what is now inside of our folder, we can see this venv folder is now there for us to explore. So this is the cool part. We're going to activate this. Now this is where it does differ a little bit from Mac and Windows. For Windows users, after we've created our virtual environments, we need to activate it. You're going to want to type your virtual environment's name, hit tab to autofill, and then start typing scripts with a capital S, hit tab again, and then activate. But pause. If you are using the command prompt, you're going to want to type activate.bat, B-A-T. If you are using PowerShell, which is the integrated terminal in VS Code, you'll type activate.ps1. When you're using the command prompt, you'll see that you're now in the virtual environment because the name will show in the parentheses on the far left. So you're good to go. If, however, you are using PowerShell, you may run into an error even if you type the correct file extension in your command. If you see this big error that says unauthorized access, the next command you're going to want to type is to see what your permissions are. We're going to type get-execution policy. Capitalize the first letter of each word. Go ahead and hit enter, and the output should say restricted, which means that we don't have permissions yet. We're going to want to close down VS Code completely. Then we're going to open up the Start menu and navigate to VS Code. However, you're going to want to right-click on it and select Run as Administrator. Once you're back in the VS Code PowerShell, cd back into the directory of your virtual environment, and then go ahead and type the following command to update the system permissions. So we're going to make sure to capitalize the first letter of each word again. Set-execution policy space remote signed. Go ahead and hit enter and then try activating your virtual environment again, and it should work for us now. Since we can see the name of our virtual environment in the parentheses, we're now good to go. You also no longer need to open VS Code as the administrator. You can just open it normally. So as far as Mac or Linux-based systems, you're going to say source space venv. I'm going to hit tab to autofill. Bin A as in activate. I'm going to hit tab for autofill. And then I'm going to go ahead and hit enter. So now if you notice, we have this little marker in our terminal. This means that for what we're doing in this terminal, we're using this virtual environment. That's great news. So now if we type in Python without the 3, you can see it's now opening up the Python shell with Python 3, and I didn't have to remember to put in that 3 indicator. So that is super cool. That also means if we were to install a package or a library in this while this is activated with pip, that's going to be activated anytime that you're inside of this virtual environment. You're going to have access to it. And you also, again, don't have to do pip3. You can just do pip install, whatever the name is. So for example, let's say we want to install Beautiful Soup, which is a great library to help us get through HTML and do some web scraping. And if we only want it for this project, but maybe we need a different version for another project, or maybe we don't want it to mess with our whole computer system, we're going to want to just install it in this virtual environment. And so as we know, we have this activated. I'm going to type in pip install Beautiful Soup 4, and then I'll just let that run. And now we can see what has been installed. I'm just going to do it a fast way. So I'm going to say pip freeze greater than sign, and then I'm just going to call requirements.txt. This is kind of an advanced thing, but we're just going to go for it so I can show you. So if we look at the requirements.txt file, you can see Beautiful Soup is in there. So now we can see that Beautiful Soup has in fact been installed. We already knew that, but we can see that in this environment, it has Beautiful Soup right in there. And so if I wanted to check on maybe another virtual environment or somewhere else, I'm going to have to get out of this virtual environment. So what I'm going to do is just type deactivate. Hit enter, and now we can see virtual environment, this venv is no longer active, and I'm just back to our normal setup with Python. So if I were to do the same thing as before, so I'm going to do pip3 freeze. So now we're going to be able to see the difference between what we had in our virtual environment, which we put into requirements.txt, and then we can also see what's outside in just without a virtual environment, requirements2.txt. So let's go ahead and check this out. Now you can see I've actually got a lot of things installed, and I've done them globally on my computer. So that probably isn't the best way to do things, but that's how I did it. But we can see that Beautiful Soup is not in there. So I can't just go into Python right now as it is and use Beautiful Soup. That's only available to me when I am inside of the virtual environment that I've set up that has that installed. So that's why it's kind of cool. We can package things up, keep things clean, keep them from getting all over in our computer like this. This is not ideal, and it's probably better to actually just install everything inside your virtual environment, kind of keep things contained. So that's why it is really important before you start diving into your Python scripts, go ahead, create your virtual environment, and then make sure it's active when you're actually coding. You can feel free to use one virtual environment and maybe put all of your scripts there, especially if you're not a developer and you're not planning on doing something for production kind of work. That should be just fine. But it does help to have virtual environments that are dedicated to just your projects. So make sure you do that before you start on your next project.